Don't try to make me sensible. I don't want to make sense.
You know, you tell an American that these two political parties that they're so infatuated with, the Democrats and the Republicans, you tell them these parties, guys, they're basically identical. And it's like everyone goes berserk. You can practically see their damn heads exploding. Man, it's no wonder why. I mean, they've both been raised on the myth that these two parties are locked in some kind of great cosmic battle for the soul of the nation. One side supposedly fighting for progress, for inclusion, for justice. The other side supposedly fighting for tradition and security and individual liberty. That's the soap opera that we see playing out on our cable news. Two mortal enemies clashing over the very future of America. Yet behind the spectacle is a far darker reality, one where the two parties look remarkably alike once you peel off the superficial brand labels. In 2024, Gallup polled Americans about their top concerns across the electorate, Republican, Democrat, and Independent, right? The most pressing issues were the economy, democracy, national security, Supreme Court appointments, and immigration. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? But when you drill down by party, the narratives do begin to diverge. Republican voters zeroed in on the economy, immigration, national security, crime, and taxes. Democrats, meanwhile, were screaming about democracy, Supreme Court picks, abortion, healthcare, and education. Two sets of voters, two sets of concerns, right? You expect to see that. That divergence, that friction is exactly the fuel that the parties use to keep us passionately fighting each other. But what about the parties themselves? The politicians, the donors, the power brokers? What are they like when the cameras shut up? Take abortion, for instance. After Donald Trump stacked the Supreme Court with 3 conservative justices, Roe v. Wade fell, and red states wasted no time outlawing abortion, some with no exceptions for rape or incest. Democrats, the so-called guardians of reproductive rights, had years in which they controlled the House and the Senate and the presidency, yet they chose not to ever codify Roe v. Wade when they had the votes. In other words, they never chose to pass a piece of legislation that secured abortion rights beyond just what the courts had to say. For all their talk about protecting women's rights, they essentially did nothing when it counted and when they had the opportunity. It's a dynamic that repeats itself constantly. One party actively pushes for a policy, while the other promises to defend the opposite stance, but never seems to lock in any sort of permanent protections. Another issue where that's the case, gun control. Republicans oppose even the faintest little whiff of new restrictions. No assault weapons ban, no permanent requirements for concealed carry, no expansion of background checks, nothing. In states they dominate, they push for constitutional carry or even open carry, effectively removing as many hurdles as possible. They want to make sure you have access to a gun. Trump himself boasted at the NRA gathering that he resisted all pressure to impose stricter gun measures. And his initial little ban on bump stocks, which was kind of surprising he even did in the first place, was overturned by the Supreme Court anyway. Democrats, on the other hand, claim they want stricter laws. Barack Obama famously lamented his inability to pass meaningful legislation after multiple mass shootings. Joe Biden did a little better. He signed the bipartisan Safer Communities Act in 2022, which was the first major gun safety law in 30 years. But if you look at that law in detail, it's hardly revolutionary. It slightly enhances background checks for buyers under 21. It provides funding for mental health services and for states to enact their own red flag laws. It also closes a small domestic violence loophole. it's a modest measure at best. It seems that no matter which party is in power, the Republicans always dictate gun policy. All right, you want to look at a real battle line? Let's look at the LGBTQ plus rights issue. Democrats push for same-sex marriage, for anti-discrimination protections, for gender-affirming healthcare coverage, and acceptance of trans people in broader society. Although it seems like some of them are now backpedaling on that. I'm looking at you, Gavin. Republicans are rolling those rights back in many states, banning gender-affirming healthcare for minors, blocking trans athletes in school sports, and restricting discussions of sexual orientation or gender identity in classrooms under these don't say gay laws. Now, that is a genuine policy chasm rooted in deeply held beliefs. Yet, even these pitched cultural battles serve to keep you distracted from the more fundamental question: who really controls the levers of power? And for that, we just follow the money. And when you follow the money, a funny thing happens. The illusions kind of break down, they kind of shatter. Republicans and Democrats both claim that they're here to protect the middle class. Who wouldn't want to protect our vaunted special middle class? Who wouldn't want to help small businesses? Who wouldn't want to champion the working American? But then you watch what happens when they write tax laws, and it all becomes clear. Trump's 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act slashed the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. Lowered the top individual tax bracket slightly, and capped state and local tax deductions, hitting high tax, typically Democratic states. Economists estimate that the bulk of the benefits flowed to corporation and to the wealthy. Meanwhile, the national deficit ballooned by trillions. Biden responded with some proposals for a 15% corporate minimum tax and a 1% tax on stock buybacks. But corporate America just went, eh. Those provisions are riddled with loopholes. Capital gains tax for millionaires. The concept seems like it's perpetually on the table, but rarely becomes law with any sort of teeth. In fact, not rarely, never. Now let's talk about the bigger question of government spending. Both parties campaign on the idea of fiscal responsibility, yet the deficit keeps on climbing no matter which party is in charge. Isn't that weird? The Bush administration launched expensive wars in the Middle East and passed unfunded tax cuts. Obama continued to run large deficits, especially after bailing out the economy, bailing out corporate America, rather, following the 2008 crash. Trump cut taxes drastically while also spending big on defense, fueling the deficit further. Biden's administration significantly pushed COVID-19 relief packages and other spending priorities. No matter what these people do, no matter who's in there, it seems like the national debt just continues to soar. And that wouldn't be such a big deal, maybe, if we at least got something for it. But did we? Did we get universal health care? No. Did we see tuition-free public colleges? I don't see them. Do you? Do you see them? I haven't seen them. How about major housing reform, meaningful worker protections, guaranteed paid leave? Do we get any of that? No. TARP in 2008 was a bipartisan fiasco. $700 billion allocated to bail out big banks while foreclosures ravaged middle America. In 2020, large corporations scored $500 billion in near blank check bailouts under the CARES Act, and small businesses struggled or closed forever. Speaking of misappropriated funds, let's take a look at defense spending, shall we? Since 2001, the Pentagon budget has soared from roughly $291 billion to more than $841 billion by 2024, and a 189% increase in just 2 decades. I mean, are we in World War III right now? Wars in Iraq, wars in Afghanistan, meddling in Libya, meddling in Syria, the ongoing support for Ukraine and Israel, and a slew of other overseas engagements have turned the U.S. into a perpetual war machine. And guess who benefits? Us? You and me? Nah, giant defense contractors. Lockheed Martin benefits. Raytheon benefits. Northrop Grumman benefits. That's who gets it. Not you, not me, none of us. No. Them. The architects of misery, the architects of pain, the architects of despair and submission. They donate generously to both parties, ensuring that the spigot of taxpayer cash never dries up. The rhetorical packaging changes. War on terror. They're sick of that one. Operation Enduring Freedom. Intervention to protect democracy. Supporting our allies against aggression. But the outcome is always the same. Billions upon billions funneled to the same gigantic conglomerates. Behind all this rancid stench of corporate influence, both parties are lavishly funded by the pharmaceutical industry, by Wall Street banks, by tech giants, by insurance behemoths, real estate developers, private equity barons, and so many more nefarious motherfuckers out there looking to stick a big dick up your ass. And if you like big dicks up your ass, you wouldn't like this one, trust me. It's a rancid motherfucker. Big Pharma alone spent about $16 million lobbying in 2024, with Kamala Harris reportedly ranking in $1.7 million from pharma interests and Trump taking in $300,000. Wall Street poured $2 billion into campaigns across the political spectrum, while tech moguls like Reid Hoffman and Peter Thiel funded different candidates on opposing sides. The game is simple. Corporations invest in both parties, hedging their bets, and they enjoy favorable legislation no matter who wins. That's how you get repeated corporate bailouts, minimal antitrust enforcement, and weak regulations on sectors like finance, pharmaceuticals, and big tech. If you want proof of this corporate infiltration and its systemic nature, look no further than the revolving door. Treasury secretaries often come straight from Goldman Sachs, only to write regulations that benefit major banks. Then they return to their corporate boardrooms. Defense secretaries routinely spin from the board of major arms contractors to the Pentagon, and then back again, awarding colossal contracts to former employers. Politicians of both stripes retire into think tanks, lobbying firms, cushy consulting gigs, leveraging their insider connections for obscene paychecks. And this is no wild, crazy, fringe conspiracy I'm telling you about here. This is widely documented. This is a normal practice that ensures that our so-called public servants ultimately serve the needs of the highest fucking bidder. And while the spotlight shines on cultural or social issues, issues that do indeed provoke genuine passion and rage from the voters, what are the parties focused on? They're focused on quietly aligning themselves with corporate power, militarism, and mass surveillance. Consider the Patriot Act, rushed into existence under George W. Bush after 9/11. It was extended and expanded under Obama with minimal pushback from Democrats, which is crazy, right? The USA Freedom Act of 2015 claimed to end bulk collection of phone records by the NSA. But all it really did was privatize it. It allowed giant telecoms like Verizon and AT&T to hold on to that data and just give it to law enforcement whenever they needed it. A cosmetic facelift at best. Edward Snowden's revelations in 2013 laid bare the scope of unconstitutional spying, but neither party effectively dismantled the machinery. They just argued over optics and then privatized the spying industry. Oh, we, the government, are not allowed to spy on American citizens. Okay, well, we'll just make it legal for AT&T and Verizon to spy on them and then give us the information as soon as we ask for it. What a loophole. Look how they handle foreign policy. Bush's invasion of Iraq was sold on lies about weapons of mass destruction. The Obama administration led from behind in Libya, culminating in the overthrow and death of Muammar Gaddafi, and a country spiraling into chaos. Trump claimed that he was going to end the endless wars, but then he dropped the largest non-nuclear bomb in Afghanistan and authorized missile strikes in Syria. Biden, for his part, withdrew from Afghanistan, but promptly ramped up aid to Ukraine after Russia's invasion, funneling tens of billions to the defense industry. Both parties sustain a global empire of military bases and interventions. Congress, whether it is Republican or it is Democrat, reliably passes bloated Pentagon budgets with bipartisan support. Let's talk about healthcare, another realm where these parties like to talk big, but rarely shake up the status quo. Democrats championed Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, expanding coverage, yet leaning heavily on private insurance markets. The public option was killed off very early on in negotiations. Even so, Republicans vilified Obamacare, repeatedly vowing to repeal and replace it, and yet they've never offered any sort of coherent alternative, even as recently as the last presidential election, when they asked Trump, what are you going to do about health care? He says, well, I have concepts of a plan. Concepts of a plan? What? In states where Republicans control the legislature, many refused to expand Medicaid. Meanwhile, Democrats show little appetite for true single-payer health care, even though polls indicate a majority of Americans would support something like Medicare for all. Now, they occasionally flirt with the idea, but once they get into power, they default to their usual half measures that keep private insurers and the pharmaceutical companies profitable. And it's no wonder we just discussed. Those companies give them lots of money. Then there's education, an area Republicans and Democrats both claim they're very fucking passionate about. Democrats do their usual shtick. Oh, we need better teachers, better funding, all that. But what have they done? Do we have any of that? Has any of that happened? No, even when they have majorities, they don't do it. They don't even try to do it. Republicans champion local control, school choice, vouchers, charter schools. They often wage war against so-called woke indoctrination in classrooms. Yet no matter who holds office, student debt keeps on climbing, teacher salaries continue to lag, and the nation's public schools remain drastically underperforming and arguably underfunded. Ultimately, the fundamental question that rarely gets asked is, who does the system serve? Look beyond the fiery speeches, the rallies, the protest signs, the hashtag wars on social media. Look instead at where the money goes. Look at who gets bailed out, which industries enjoy generous tax breaks, deregulation, subsidies, and revolving door access to power. Look at how the surveillance state keeps on expanding, how the defense budget remains sacrosanct, how infrastructure bills get tangled up, while stock market valuations soar. Well, at least until Trump and his stupid tariffs. And how healthcare costs remain astronomical. Over and over, the corporate elite thrive, the war machine grows, the intelligence apparatus remains unleashed, and the working class Americans bear the brunt of a rigged system. And you know what? The American people realize this. I don't know if they realize it in all of its full breadth and width and depth and stuff, but they got a general idea of this stuff. Pew Research found that only around 16% of citizens of this country think that the political system actually works for them. And what a naive, dipshit 16% those people are. The rest either checked out in despair or they picked a side, hoping that maybe their team would be different this time around. But hey, after countless election cycles, with Republicans and Democrats swapping power over and over and over again, the same underlying results seem to keep popping up. Corporate donors, giant lobbying firms, and big money interests dictate policy more than any grassroots movement, more than any populist rhetoric. Now, does that mean that the two parties are identical in every single respect? Of course not. Social issues are real. The consequences of those battles absolutely affects people's lives. Women seeking abortions, LGBTQ people fighting for their rights, families worried about gun violence. But these cultural differences, as visceral and as legitimate as they are, also serve as the perfect smokescreen for deeper economic, military, and surveillance consensus between our two supposed parties. So yes, you see them brawling about whether to ban certain books, about the specifics of abortion laws, about how to handle guns or pronouns or whatever. And those fights matter, especially to those who are impacted by them. Yet on the biggest, broadest issues, corporate power, military spending, the reach of intelligence agencies, the overhauls needed to make healthcare affordable, they are all suspiciously unified, or at best, engaged in rather superficial squabbles that change very little. Both parties will trot out their new slogans every election cycle. They'll demonize each other in apocalyptic language, warning that if you vote the wrong way, America will collapse into tyranny, into chaos. But the real tyranny is already here. It's already been here for a long time. The tyranny of corporate money, the tyranny of a rigged system that perennially keeps 99% of us scrounging while the 1% collects and expands their obscene wealth. The real chaos is the unchecked expansion of the national security state, the tangle of half-baked economic policies that feed bubbles and bailouts, and the endless foreign interventions that devour our tax dollars and spill blood across the globe. So the next time you find yourself shouting at your neighbor, or shouting at someone on Twitter, or shouting at someone on wherever, take a step back and ask yourself, whose interest does this outrage serve? Does it serve your interest? Does it serve your neighbor's interest, your family, your friends? You know it doesn't serve their interest, right? You know whose interest it serves, a handful of puppet masters who need you distracted, who need you locked in a bitter feud over wedge issues while they continue a system that brazenly rewards corporate donors, bankrolls forever wars, and normalizes mass surveillance. The tragic punchline is that we keep letting them do it. Election after election after election. Because we've been fed the lie that we have a real choice. When in fact, we're mostly just picking the style of the same substance. The lever changes the color of the trolley from red to blue. Strip it all down, and you'll see the truth. Democrats and Republicans are not waging a holy war for the soul of the country. They're cogs in a machine designed to keep power in the hands of a little tiny, itty-bitty elite. They might differ in style. They might differ in tone. They might differentiate themselves on some social policies, but they close ranks when it comes to protecting the corporate-driven, deficit-exploding, war-hungry, surveillance-obsessed status quo. Every new administration claims it's going to drain the swamp. It's going to restore democracy. But the swamp never drains, and democracy remains pay to play, while we rage at each other on social media over culture war issues, those with real money and real influence go on shaping policy behind closed doors. And that is the con. And we keep falling for it. So tell me again, does any of this sound like a genuine choice? Or does it sound like we've been sold the greatest lie of all time, other than religion? Maybe it's time we wake up to the fact that the system doesn't serve us so long as we're busy fighting each other, blind to the identical corporate strings yanking both parties. Maybe the American experiment truly is about freedom and self-determination, but it's never going to be realized so long as we place our faith in two factions that claim to be mortal enemies, yet march in lockstep on the issues that really matter to the ruling class. If that doesn't make your blood boil, then what will?
What you even gonna do? What you even gonna do? What you even gonna do? Who the fuck is even you? Who but do but do but do?